During this time of pandemic, the aviation industry and the education system are mostly affected with the sudden changes. The result of the effectiveness of this new learning system of education and understanding will provide the idea for us on what area to develop for the growth of our country's system. It covers all learners, not only for our aviation personnel, but also with the specific courses that are adopting this new normal system. For our study, to identify the patterns in the data that are important for further research, we will use a thematic analysis for key informant interviews. The affiliations of the respondents are mostly students that is studying in an aviation school. That has something to do with the linguistic feature of aviation. In this study, we will use the key format interview with at least 100 respondents that is currently taking the subject Aviation English. Prioritizing learners' understanding of aviation English and phraseology, there is a need to uptake sheet to know the strengths and weaknesses of learners during synchronous and asynchronous classes. The present study aims to assess students with regards to how they understand aviation English and phraseology in synchronous and asynchronous classes.
As you all know, Synchronous is a learning two-way system where the students and instructors are engaging with one another using computer and other devices connected to the internet. And whereas the asynchronous learning is a method of providing modules and learning guides for the learners to study by themselves. And this study, we are aiming to understand holistically this new system of learning to cope up in the thick of the pandemic. Just like any other learning methods, virtual learning has its own pros and cons. By learning the performance of students during synchronous and asynchronous learning will help us determine the strengths and the weaknesses. Understand and come up with different strategies to minimize the cons of virtual learning with the aid of uptake sheets. So, uptake sheets are commonly used to monitor the performance and learning of students during virtual classes. So, through this, we can easily identify which works best and what's not. Additionally, we would make synchronous and asynchronous learning balanced, as well as expanding our learning methods for students who have limited access to technology. And the significance of our study is it could contribute to new knowledge, departments, and agencies in country by creating a new path for learners or should I say students who are affected by the pandemic. And the department or institute like CHED and other aviation institutions are providers of the aviation course will benefit within this study through understanding the effectiveness of the new learning system.
We end up with our statement of the problem, which will be used in research works as a claim that outlines the problem and addresses with our study. Problem statement 1, what is the demographic profile of the respondent in terms of age and sex? Grouping our respondent based on their demographic profile, let us identify the learning capability to initiate a learning method that addresses with the synchronous and asynchronous classes in aviation English. This allows us to organize and to identify if this demographic profile affects the learners and effectiveness in learning with this in this teaching method. Problem statement 2, what is the level of self-efficacy in terms of linguistic features of the aviation student on online teaching in synchronous and asynchronous classes? Addressing the level of knowledge of a student capacity to execute behavior necessary to produce a specific performance attainment in terms within the linguistic features on online teachings asynchronous and asynchronous classes. Identifying the level of their individual efficacy will answer the problem that is being investigated within this research. Answering if the student or learners who are initiated with this kind of specific teaching method, whether within this synchronous and asynchronous meeting. Problem statement 3, is there a significant difference in the level of self-efficacy of the aviation student on online teaching in asynchronous and asynchronous classes when grouped according to their demographic profile? This compile the two problems that addresses the concern of the level of self-efficacy of the aviation student if this online teaching in synchronous and asynchronous classes will have a significant difference if it is grouped correspondingly with their demographic profile. Addressing the concern whether student level of efficacy only relies on their profile or whether this affects the uptakes of the student with the teaching method.
For the conceptual framework, it is divided with three major components. First, input. The respondents will be aviation students who are currently taking their class online. Age and sex will be identified. Questionnaires will be distributed to evaluate their experiences. Second, for the process, uptake sheet survey will be conducted. Pre-employment interview will be used to analyze the data that is useful for our study. Third, for the output, recommendatory framework for possible enhancement of teaching aviation English on synchronous and asynchronous setup.
Again, I am Jairus Duque, and the content of our methodology here is for this study to be reliable. The affiliations of our respondents are students that are studying in an aviation school. We will be conducting this study for at least 100 students using the sample uptake sheet and the key informant survey questionnaire. So, meaning it doesn't matter what year level you're in as long as you've encountered studying aviation English, physiology in an online setup or a modular learning. Students are also required to answer the uptake sheet survey since the data gathered here will be vital in figuring out how the students will learn, especially in the linguistic side of the aviation English. So we will use the key informant survey questionnaire, and the type of analysis to be used here is thematic analysis. So mostly we've chosen this kind of analysis since we know it will be able to answer the statement of the problems, and we'll be able to organize and transcribe that data. We will be able to identify themes, patterns that has a meaning within the data that we've gathered. And then the hypothesis part here is that we think that there's no, our educated guess is that there's no significant difference in the level of self-efficacy of aviation students and synchronous and asynchronous classes when it is grouped according to their profile. So these are the references that's been useful in our study. So examples of our uptake sheet here is shown. In the first column on the right is what are you noticing about. Under it is the pronunciation, vocabulary, and grammar. Next column is that who said it. So check as many as you wish. So this mainly focuses on the reliability of the synchronous and asynchronous classes. So if you've learned it to your teachers during the meeting online class, or if you learned it to your classmate in a group interaction or an activity, it's more in the synchronous class. If it's on yourself, it's mostly on the synchronous classes or in your modular learning. So was it new to you? So this column part here it says yes or no. So you would check if this information is new to you, it would gain knowledge to yourself. So it is effective. If it's not, then it will be less effective. So the next example here is the appendix B sample key format interview questions. We've sampled here 6 sets of questions that mostly focuses on the demographic profile of the respondents, the trialability of the question, if it's effective enough. Uh, Also, it describes on the barriers or the challenges that you felt if you had to overcome in the studying of aviation English and physiology in an online setup, since we all know how hard it is right now to adjust. And then it also encounters the relative advantage if it's reliable enough to use in the further research studies, also in the general studies. So that's all, folks. Thank you very much for listening. And again, we are group 5. Thank you very much.